So when the soldier comes forward and says that he now is or she now is a conscientious objector, the burden of proof is on them, and the standard is relatively high. It has to be what's called clear and convincing evidence. They have to prove by clear and convincing evidence that their beliefs have substantially changed, that they're firm, fixed, sincere, and they're based on religious, moral, or ethical beliefs, and not on a philosophical point of view, which is also kind of interesting, because I think some people do come to just war from a philosophical.
Clear and convincing evidence of deeply held beliefs.
Right.
So you have to write a dissertation to show that you are.
But it's not just intellectual. It has to be a heart.
It has
religious.
And this is two problems with that.
Wow.
You know, and there is no easy way to measure whether somebody's truly a CO. And so I'm not faulting the Army, but it is a hard one. So it requires measuring the heart. And you know, we've talked in this whole class about this is one of the most difficult things. Even I think it was Aquinas talked about how you can't right intention is something that is part of just war, but you can't measure the heart except through outward actions. There are examples, or there are benchmarks to look for to determine whether or not somebody's got right intention. But the hard thing about COs is, first of all, it's not a standard across the Army among those who make the decisions. It's just more, like David said, individual command climates. And secondly, it's a heart measurement. Are you sincere? Sincerity is the big thing, you know.
The S index.
Right.
You get a 105. You get a 93.
Right. And then they start in the regulation. I sent it out this week. I don't expect you to read it. The regulation says things like, if you're a member of a religious organization or a church that believes conscientious objection is the way to go, whether it's a pacifist church, that doesn't necessarily make you a pacifist. On the other hand, if you're a part of a religious organization that does not claim a pacifist point of view, that doesn't necessarily make you not a pacifist. So then you're just like, what do I look at him and see if, do I look in his eyes and just see if I believe him? So it gets really weird.
Well, it seems that in the system by which you want you investigate or interview whether or not a soldier is a conscientious objector, gives them or recognizes the right to change even after you come into the military. I mean that's a right that someone has, at least based on our country's understanding of individual freedom and conscience.
But I would say this, you're right, it is a right, but this is also interesting about this right. It's a right, according to case law, according to the Supreme Court, not guaranteed by the Constitution. It's not, you do not have a constitutional right to be a conscientious objector. Okay, and that's what our courts have said. However, the United States Congress has made it very clear that, well, okay, that's fine, you may not have a constitutional right, but we are giving you a statutory right. So that the U.S. Code, which is the Congress's statutes, carves out a right and mandates that the military allow soldiers the option, if they meet the criteria of conscientious objection.
So is it from U.S. Code to UCMJ?
It's actually from U.S. Code to Department of Defense instruction. So it goes from the Congress to the Department of Defense, and then down to Army regulation, Air Force regulation, Navy. I forgot what Navy calls their regulations.
So the UCMJ doesn't address it?
No, the UCMJ does not address conscientious objection. The only way the UCMJ would theoretically address it is indirectly if a soldier was found not to be a conscientious objector and then failed to get on the plane, or went AWOL to avoid deployment. Then the UCMJ addresses the conduct, but not the belief. When a soldier claims to be a conscientious objector and then goes AWOL, when they're court-martialed, they're not supposed to talk about this. The court-martial is not a platform for them to discuss their beliefs, and they know that and they're told that. It doesn't mean they don't do it, you know, because they may have their own reasons in the big picture that they want to get on the record their beliefs. But it doesn't matter what they believe. What matters is, did you or did you not show up on the plane that you were manifested to show up on? Did you know you were supposed to be there? Did you know that you received a lawful order? And that can be proven by circumstantial evidence, even if they claim, well, I wasn't sure what time, you know. If an order was put in writing, or if 10 soldiers testify, yeah, he was right next to us in the formation when they announced it. But no, the UCMJ, which is the military's criminal code, does not address it. It's the military's administrative regulations that address it. And another interesting thing about conscientious objection is that there's two types in the Army. Okay, and when you apply for conscientious objection, you have to explain which one you're doing. And oh, by the way, the chaplain has to help the soldier apply for conscientious objection. Okay, but there's two types. There's one that says, it's called 1-0, that says that you are opposed to serving in the military in any shape or form in any war. Okay, so that means what? That sounds like almost like the early church fathers when they talked about can Christians serve in the military. In fact, going back to just war with this, the interesting thing about conscientious objection, I think, is that it asks the same question that the early church fathers asked. Remember a few weeks ago we talked about how the early church fathers asked not what are the criteria for just war, but can a Christian serve in the military? Later on, with Augustine, Aquinas, and so on and so forth, basically Constantine on, we started to ask the questions of what is a just war, what makes up a just war. It didn't start there because Plato and Cicero talked about it a lot, but that's when Christians really started addressing the issue. But the first 300 years of the church, the question was, can a Christian serve in the military? And that's what conscientious objection, it doesn't ask that question, but it addresses the question of, can this person, may I serve in the military as a fighter? Okay, but that's what 1-0 is, and I think that really starts to sound a lot like the early church fathers in the question that they're addressing. But the second type is 1-0A. Are you familiar with that, Paul? Okay. That's a type of conscientious objection you can apply for where you say, I am opposed to war in any form. Okay, remember, that has to be the standard. It can't be, I'm opposed to particular wars. It has to be, I'm opposed to war in general. However, I am willing to serve in the military in a non-combatant status. Personally, I think somebody that applies for 1.0A is a little more credible. Okay, personally, especially if it's right before they're going to deploy. Because what they're saying is, I'm willing to serve, and perhaps even willing to risk my life, but I'm not willing to carry a weapon. There was a story of a Christian Roman soldier, and I don't know if I told it or not, but it was in my notes, or maybe one of my early drafts. He became a Christian. He was a Roman soldier. This was about maybe 200 AD. Okay, and it was the eve of a huge battle, and he told his commander, I can't fight because I'm a Christian, and Christians don't fight. We love our enemies, you know. And they said, oh, you know, you're only doing this because you're a chicken, you want to get out of the battle. I'm sure they said it a little bit differently, but you're a coward, you're just trying to avoid the battle, you don't want to die. And this soldier said, you know what, I will stand with my soldiers, with my fellow soldiers on the front lines. I will stand there, but I will not be armed. And that's not exactly how 1.0A is, but that's a little bit of the whole idea of, I don't mind wearing the uniform, but I have to throw down my weapons. I can't fight. And what we do practically in the military with the 1.0A is either assign them to as medics, although of course you have to get a lot of training to be a medic, or more likely to put them in a desk job. Is that what you do?
Well, yeah, at the local or the lowest organizational level, if someone says, well, even if the culture or if the command recognizes that there's something going on with this particular soldier that we question whether or not it will be helpful for him or her to actually be in positive engagement with the enemy, you really don't want them on the line. Mm-hmm. So you, at the very local level, at the lowest level, you just administratively put them in another job.
That's a very peculiar, though, position for them to be in. How can they help the machinery of war and simply not carry a weapon?
Well, how could Origen and Tertullian
they're
pray
not really
for the victory?
participating in
Right.
some sense?
Well, but see, and that's a very good question. But if you recall, Origen and Tertullian both, who were very clear, in fact, Tertullian was probably the most clear of any early church father that a Christian fighting in war is a terrible thing. You know, how can we who have sworn allegiance to Christ possibly, and who teaches us to love our enemies, possibly take up the sword? How can we, you know, Tertullian was very clear. And yet, you know, talking about supporting the machinery of war, Tertullian and Origen, who was equally clear, prayed for the success of the army.